Welcome to another episode of Women Investing in Women. Robin and I get re-energized and invigorated every time we talk to an amazing woman. Women, for time immemorial, have made huge contributions to society and shaped the world we live in, generation after generation. But we don't always get to share that, celebrate that, or take the credit for it. So through this conversation of women investing in women, we truly want to change the concept of history, his story, because men wrote history, to writing her story, our stories, because our stories are stories of families, stories of communities, stories of civilizations. So let's write those, let's take our power, let's own our power, and let's live in that power. With that said, Robin, go ahead and introduce our amazing guest, Kate, today.
I am so excited. We are so excited to have Kate be on our program today. And I actually met Kate actually not that many years ago, 3 years ago, when I was in the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at University of Pennsylvania. And Kate and her husband were guest lecturers there, where they talked about their organization, CorStone, and they help us youth and schools and teachers and girls and women, primarily in third world countries, building resilience, helping to bring resilience and other mental health and well-being aspects into the school. And I was just blown away by what they both had to say and especially what Kate had to say. So as soon as Cass and I created this program, I said, oh my gosh, we've got to have Kate on. So Kate, tell us more about what you do, about CorStone, and what motivated you to get into this organization and create this organization.
Oh my gosh, Robin, thank you. What a kind introduction. I really appreciate it. It was so wonderful, of course, to be there where we initially met. And now I'm so glad to be, together again, albeit virtually. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. It's really exciting to be together, Robin and Cass, and really excited to be able to talk about these really important topics as well. So just a little bit about me. So I'm Kate Leventhal, obviously, and just overall, I would say my broad interests are really about how to help people improve their well-being among everybody in the world. No matter what your background is, no matter what your circumstances are, no matter how you identify. And that gets really tricky, though, as we all know, right? Because frequently what is happening is that we're trying to improve and support well-being, but we're trying to do so within what I often like to call disordered systems, right? So when we talk about well-being, a lot of that work comes out of mental health, as you were starting to mention, Robin, right? And when we often think of mental health, we often think of mental disorders, right? And often when we consider disorders, mental disorders, who are we thinking of as being disordered? We're thinking of people, of individuals having disorders, of people sort of having a disordered response to a normal situation or a normal system. But actually what is really much more accurate for so many people, and I think, in the case of women and girls in particular, how, we often know and hear that there are higher rates, for instance, of some mental disorders among women and girls, or struggling with mental health issues. What actually is happening in these instances is that women and girls are actually very frequently having normal responses to a disordered system, right? And so the problem's in the system. It's not in the way women and girls are responding to it. And so how can we support wellness how can we support well-being within that kind of situation, right? And it's a global situation with obviously local iterations of that and personal iterations of that. And so that's what I work on, right? So I take a few different angles to that. The way we met, Robin, was really sort of with my CorStone hat on, I will say. And that is where I've been our chief program officer. I've been there for our last 12 years. And that's where we really develop, conduct, and research programs to improve well-being for youth, as you mentioned, in low and middle income countries. And we really focus on girls as specifically as change agents within their communities. At CorStone, our largest programs are in India, Kenya, and Rwanda. So far, we've reached over 200,000 youth, and we'll be scaling up to reach 5 million youth annually over the next few years by integrating what we do within government school systems. So essentially, we train government trainers who then train teachers, who then are able to conduct well-being programs for kids within their own classrooms. And the goal here is really to make well-being education, to make these tools for well-being, which are actually possible to teach and possible to help people access, to make that accessible to every single child, regardless of who they are, regardless of their circumstances, and regardless of where they're from. So that's sort of my CorStone hat. I also do wear another hat, which we may or may not get into talking about, but I also am affiliated as a researcher in a PhD program. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Edinburgh in Scotland in clinical psychology. And that's where I'm essentially researching a lot of the same things, but from a little bit of a different angle. I really sort of get more into the theory and the background of resilience as a specific construct and concept. And one of the things we're doing, which I can talk more about if of interest, is really looking at a new concept, a new construct called socially transformative resilience, which is especially in these sorts of situations of marginalization, of oppression, just how do we find ways to still be well and also to change the systems that are leading to the lack of wellness in the first place. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. And it's not just amazing, it resonates for me deeply, given my life experience and what I am doing right now. So some of the things that struck me are the fact that you identifying the systemic issues that puts stresses on women and girls. And as nurturers, caregivers, and leaders of the household, regardless of how legally it's defined in different cultures, right? Women are anchoring families. That means it is the building block of society. And what happens to them in that systemic environment shapes everything. And so how do we give women and girls the ability to navigate that without losing themselves in that process? That is huge. But then also women and girls, how do they then raise boys and support men? Because that is also required by women in a male constructed system where women don't have as much flexibility. So that truly deeply resonates for me. And one of my observations, especially in the United States, whenever a woman challenges the status quo or challenges the system, the pet answer, and even women on the other side of the phone or in a conversation will tell other women, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I immediately correct, we are not talking about feelings. It's not an abstract. We're talking about lived experiences. And I go on to say, you know, if I hit you with a baseball bat for 10 years continuously, are you going to tell me you feel bad, or are you going to tell me I'm actually physically hurting you? Right? So how do we get even women to understand, break the script the men gave you, and truly understand that life is lived not just in a place of feeling. Yes, we are feeling creatures who happen to think and act, but what is the thinking going into creating these constructs? How are these constructs truly physically affecting our lives? And can we truly talk about all of that instead of brushing it away as if, I'm sorry, you feel that way. Somehow it's your responsibility and you're somehow convoluting it to feel bad because you want to take something out of me because you've had a bad day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think what you are describing is actually very similar to a lot of the tensions that we're unearthing, especially in this study of socially transformative resilience that we're working on right now. I think that just to kind of bring it maybe into maybe some of kind of my own examples, I guess, as a woman, as, you know, a working mom, for instance, you know, it's interesting. I think it's certainly a challenge to try to support others to be well who are living within this disordered system, while also trying to be well myself while living in this, you know, disordered system. And so I think that exactly the way you say, Cass, I think, you know, there are just so many impossible expectations, there are impossible demands, and so many of them are directly in conflict with your own well-being, you know, as a woman or as a working mom, or just however it is that you identify. And there's so frequently this tension, and we're finding this in the research as well. There's actually this tension between, okay, do I take care of my own feelings right now, or do I take action? Because sometimes those things can be in conflict with one another, right? And it can be really hard to decide. It can be really hard to know what to do in a situation. So, and I think also it's very hard because there aren't a whole lot of models out there, or at least a lot of, I'll say, in terms of the way we talk about how to be well as women within our culture, we frequently get examples of like, oh, let's do some more self-care, right? Oh, let's make sure you have a bubble bath, you know, call up a friend, you know, you'll be fine. It's don't worry about the patriarchy, just like have a glass of wine, you know, that kind of thing, right? Or let's do some yoga together. It's we're all golden, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum, it's kind of like, well, you see other examples of what it means to be well as a woman and to sort of really push back against the system, like going out there and kind of tirelessly fighting, maybe joining demonstrations against the overturning of Roe v. Wade, or, you know, whatever it is that is sort of your cause that you're kind of pushing back upon. You kind of look at these examples of what it means to be well and what it means to navigate the system, and you sort of are missing the holistic picture of, well, okay, how can we actually integrate these things? How can we actually find ways to navigate all of this and be well as women? And we're really finding that so frequently it comes down to this real moment of choice in terms of how you decide to respond. Right? Are you deciding to be sort of more focused on your own emotions? Are you deciding to be more externally focused? And how you approach that. It's actually less about whether you decide to do one or the other, but it's more about what kind of attitudes you bring to making that choice, what kind of values you bring to making that choice. And as long as you're sticking to those sorts of attitudes and values that we're finding, which I can, you know, tell about more if you'd like, that sort of over time, the choices that you make will be supportive of your well-being and will be supportive of changing the system. So that's just, I think, also sort of an interesting way to think about it.
I'm loving what you are saying, that it is both an individual component and absolutely a systemic component. And oftentimes by changing the system, it enables the individuals to change for the better as well. And so I'm really fascinated with how you were able to go into these schools or government organizations, now you have tons of research, to back up this works, do it. Oh, okay, well, we'll do it. But when you were starting, you didn't have all that research. So how are the ways that you found it's effective to help systems make change in ways that support the individual? So systemic change for the better, which then leads to individual change for the better.
I have to say, I love that question. And I especially love the direction of this conversation in talking about individuals and systems, because we frequently at CorStone get the question, now, do you work with systems or do you work with individuals? Like, which one do you do? Like, you kind of can't do both. That's almost a question that we get all the time. And what I often say is, yes. As in, well, think about it. What are systems made of? They're not made, we may think of them as sort of like this faceless, robotic machine, and maybe there's like a little bit of elements of that, but really what systems are made of are individuals. Right. And it's made of, massive amounts of individuals making many, many choices every single day of how they're going to act, of what they're going to change, what they're going to keep the same, how they're going to work together. That's what systems are, how people are going to respond to each other, how they're not going to respond to each other. That's just what systems are. And so we really do start at the individual level, even in terms of systems change. So what I mean by that is when we're talking about, say, working with government systems, which is frequently what we do at CorStone. One of our major, visions and goals and hopes is that every child everywhere is going to have access to well-being education, as I mentioned, right? And so in order to do that, we need to change education systems to integrate well-being education into, a guaranteed component of this is what schooling looks like in the areas where we work, which is absolutely not the case when we usually come in, right? In low and middle income countries, also in higher income countries, right now, well-being education is generally not something that is guaranteed, as just a complete guarantee for kids who go through school systems. And so when we go in and we say, okay, we're going to change the system, we don't say, okay, great, let's work with the faceless system. We think, okay, so who are the individuals within those systems? Like, how can we think about ways to connect on a human level with those individuals to really help them see what well-being is and the importance of well-being, right? And that's frequently what we do, is that we essentially hold orientations and we hold trainings and we invite individuals who are decision makers within systems to come and be part of these trainings, to come and get an experience of what well-being and resilience and all the things that we do, what it is all about. And frequently people say at first, oh, we don't have time for that, it's just important to make sure that the kids know how to read, or, it's whatever it is that their things, that their priorities are within the system that have been set, right? And then they come to these trainings, and I will say universally that people leave these trainings saying, not only do I want more of this, I want this for my life, but everybody in the world should have access to these tools. Everybody all the kids within our schools, etc. Right? And so then it becomes a piece of essentially individuals within a system working to change the system from the inside out. And so we really talk about an inside out approach that begins within individuals, and then it begins within individuals within systems. And then we're sort of exploding the systems from the inside out, if that I'm not sure about that visual, but that's that's kind of the way we think about it.
Makes total sense, Kate. Makes absolutely sense. And so as I'm thinking back, I don't know if you know, but I'm originally from Sri Lanka, from a very matriarchal society. But I also lived in India for 5 years, which is a very patriarchal society. So up until 16, I was in Sri Lanka. 16 to 21, I was in India. And the contrast was stark for me. I'm just curious, your work, you focus on India as one of the countries. As you're working with women there, it's slightly an oxymoron because it's a culture that worship goddesses, but it's a culture that also handcuffs and chains the women in so many different ways. And it's not even safe for women to be out there. I remember carrying an open safety pin in a bag of chili powder with me everywhere I went, because that was necessary for protection as a 16, 17-year-old girl raising a sister alongside, right? So in that culture, the system is so broken. How do you empower women when they're not allowed to feel safe, even in their own homes, because they marry and move into the man's home and they're under the man's regime, and the oppressor, if at all there is a villain in that scenario, it's the mother-in-law, it's another woman. So the system is women oppressing women and then encouraging their men to oppress women. How does that work with the work you're doing? Because you have to go through all of that.
Oh, these are, I mean, I really appreciate the question. They're situations that we deal with every single day, right? When working within India, and also in other areas as well. There's some parallels. I mean, there are many ways to answer the question, but I'm actually going to focus on one in particular, and that actually is through a set of work called character strengths, which I know Robin is probably very familiar with, having gone through the positive psychology masters. It's a set of work that really does stem from positive psychology and the work of Marty Seligman and other researchers in particular. But over the years, you know, it's really become a very robust field of research, field of work. And the whole concept of character strengths, just for those of you listening who may or may not know, is that we all have these strengths, these qualities inside of us. Every single person who has ever lived on the earth, who will ever live on the earth, has qualities inside of them that are powerful, right? That are sources that we can draw upon in times of difficulty, in times of good. They're valued by cultures around the world. They're valued by you as an individual. There are things, for instance, like creativity or love or open-mindedness or bravery or social intelligence. I mean, things that are just within you. And everybody is a little bit different in turn. You almost have like your own little fingerprint of, here are the strengths that kind of come naturally to me. Here are the ones that, you know, I'm wanting to develop more, things like that. And at the same time, absolutely everybody has them, right? So I think that's one of the main points to know about these strengths. And that is the very first thing that we do with kids in our programs. The very first session, we say, okay, great, we're going to talk about our strengths, and everybody is going to identify what their top strengths are that are just, you don't even have to do anything, and they're just flowing forth from you, right? So people might identify that girls might identify that their top strengths are curiosity or, you know, open-mindedness or whatever it is, and then they kind of get these strengths, right? And they're just saying, wow, you know, wow, I have these strengths. And I will tell you that what we hear over and over and over again that has stuck with kids, and especially girls after this program, is nobody ever told us we had strengths. And that was such a gigantic light bulb moment for them, just a transformational moment that they have then taken and applied in so many situations, right? We have heard of, I could tell you long stories about girls who very specifically have said, well, I have bravery, I have creativity. I am going to use those strengths to oppose the marriage that, the early marriage that is, being proposed to me, that my parents have arranged, even though I'm only 13 or 14 years old, for example, or I'm going to use these strengths to get myself out of an abusive situation, for example. And just knowing that they have these strengths is one of the most important parts and most important steps, it seems, for kids and for girls in particular in these settings, to really start to undo so much of the many, many thousands of years that is really sort of almost scripted into the DNA of like, well, you are a girl, this is what you're worthy of, right? And it's starting to just undo that and say, wait, actually, I have so much more worth than what I thought. And that is just so huge for them. And obviously there's much more that we do within the program, but that is one of the things that really sticks with people. And that seems really, really transformative.
Wow, that is amazing. It's like I have chills listening to what you're saying. It is just so powerful. And I know we could go on for a very long time. This 25 minutes has just blown by here. We'll have to have you back again for
Oh, thanks.
But we typically like to ask, Cass has mentioned, some of the challenges, and you've addressed some of the challenges. But if you could just pick 2 or 3 golden nuggets to share with people who listen to this conversation later on once it's released, what are a few golden nuggets that you can take away in terms of systemic change and individual empowerment?
Oh, I love that. So I think honestly, I would more just leave people with some questions to consider, I'll say. I really would love to have people think about, and anyone who's listening, just think a little bit about, drop in and think, what do you think the world would be like if every single person on Earth had access to the tools that could support their well-being? What would change for individuals? What would change for the systems that these individuals are making up if people actually had these tools at their disposal to improve their own well-being? What would change for global society? And, bringing it back to the topic of women and girls, what would change for women and girls? What would change for you in your own life, those who are listening, if you had all the tools for well-being, if others had all the tools for well-being? And just, I would say certainly that I do think, as we've been talking about, that this interchange for individuals towards more well-being could actually then loop back around to change disordered systems for the better, make the things that we've thought have been acceptable for so long, just make them unacceptable. And that would then loop back around to supporting well-being for individuals even further. So I think that's sort of the first question. And then the second one really being about what can we do in order to make that more feasible for these tools of well-being to really be available to everybody? Where can you integrate supporting well-being within your own life? Where can you support others to integrate well-being within the systems that they're responsible for, within your own family system, within the schools where your children go, wherever it is? How can you really start to advocate and give people the experience of what it means to be well as well? So I think those are just some of the questions that I'd love to leave listeners with.
I love the approach of open-ended questions because you're seeding the thinking process, and you're seeding through that thinking process how people can feel about themselves differently and start acting differently, right? So I love how you flipped the idea of golden nuggets to questions that can help you move forward. So thank you for that, Kate. If folks want to get in touch with you, what is the best way they can do that? We want to make sure you are articulating that, and then we will also include that in the YouTube release.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you can feel free, probably the easiest is to find me on LinkedIn, send me a message there. We of course have, ways to contact us at CorStone more generally, that I'm sure you'll share the CorStone website. You can visit there as well. And certainly, connect on Twitter as well. I use that more sort of for my researcher hat. So if you're a little bit more interested in the research side of things, find me on Twitter. If you're interested more in the CorStone and kind of practice and program side of it, you can find me on LinkedIn or at the CorStone website.
Thank you so much, Kate. Robin and I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I know you have planted the seeds for many women and girls and even fathers and sons to start thinking about how they can embrace these elements in their life and truly look at well-being from a more holistic perspective. Yes, it is not just a bubble bath or a spa day, right? Because we women have so much more on our plates that's not going to be solved with a spa day. So as we bring this insightful conversation to an end, I want us all to take a moment and take an introspective journey and think about what is going to serve me well, and what is it going to help me show up in the best version of me so that I can be there for me first, and then for those I love and for the causes I care. And when we start looking at life through that lens, hopefully we can all become a little more resilient, a little more focused, a little more present. And through our thoughts, actions, and feelings, change the world we're a part of. Because change happens one person at a time, one action at a time, one collaborative bridge built at a time. So let's go out there, ladies, and let's build those bridges, open our hearts, and build those lasting bonds that are going to help shape the future we want to see, because ultimately we are the change we're waiting to see.